It seems the United States' good intentions may end up backfiring when it comes to the Anti-Terrorism Cooperation Act, or ATCA, as Israeli officials are now trying to convince Washington to amend the recently passed law. Under the guidelines of ATCA, an American court would have jurisdiction to rule in terror-related cases against foreign parties and governments, provided they accept United States aid funding. Due to this, the Palestinian Authority has already informed the United States that it intends to reject any American money starting February 1st. But without the payments, Jerusalem fears that a fatal blow may be dealt to security coordinations between Israel and the PA. That's why, according to a Channel 13 news report, the Prime Minister's office has now contacted the White House, the State Department, and multiple members of Congress to either amend ATCA or find some other way to send funding to the Palestinian Authority. As one Israeli official explained to Channel 13, quote, "If the American law isn't changed and a solution isn't found, it could be a fatal blow to the security coordination with the Palestinian Authority. It will harm a top Israeli security interest," end quote. That being said, the ongoing United States government shutdown is making any such changes virtually impossible. Meanwhile, also in Israel's best security interests, the third installment of $15 million in cash from Qatar has been allowed to enter the Strip for Hamas, after being delayed for a day in response to clashes along the Gaza border. But at the advice of many security officials, Israel's cabinet reportedly realized that in the end, withholding the money from Gaza would cause more harm than good. In other news, Israeli President Reuven Rivlin met with his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron in France on Wednesday to mark Israel's 70th anniversary as well as 70 years of French-Israeli relations. And during their meetings, which also falls ahead of International Holocaust Remembrance Day on January 27th, the two leaders reiterated both their positions against the rise in anti-Semitism in France and in Europe in general. They also met with multiple European activists for the same reasons. But the pair's conversation also turned to security in the Middle East, especially with respect to Iran's missile activity, support for proxy groups like Hezbollah, and entrenchment in Syria.
Nous avons évoqué l'Iran, et je le redis, nous considérons que nous devons poursuivre le dialogue pour pouvoir contrôler les activités balistiques, se donner plus de visibilité pour limiter, encadrer les activités nucléaires et avoir un dialogue permettant de contenir les ambitions régionales de l'Iran. Et à cet égard, j'ai évidemment rappelé notre plein soutien au président Rivlin.
ישראל לא תשלים ולא יכולה להשלים עם מאגרי הטילים המדויקים שחיזבאללה פורס בשטח לבנון ושהכתובת שלהם היא אחת, אזרחי מדינת ישראל. אם יהיה עלינו איום מלבנון, לא נוכל לעמוד מנגד. לבנון נושאת ותישא באחריות הריבונות לכל פעולה של חיזבאללה.
That being said, French President Macron also reiterated that while Israeli security remains an important principle, dropping out of the JCPOA nuclear deal altogether, as Israel and the United States might like, is still out of the question. He said that France believes that, quote, "we must continue the dialogue in order to control Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile activity," end quote. Israel clearly disagrees, however, as Jerusalem has consistently been against the JCPOA and supports doing whatever is necessary in the region to prevent the Iranian regime from advancing its goals. This, of course, includes the hundreds of strikes on Iranian targets in Syria over the last few years. In some very exciting news, Israel and Ukraine have just signed a massive free trade agreement that's set to dramatically change the future of relations between the two countries. And joining us with more details on this story is Natasha Kirchuk. Now, Natasha, first of all, thank you for joining us. Why is this such a big deal?
Happy to be here. Well, Ukraine and Israel have been negotiating this historic deal for the last 15 years, which will actually be Israel's 9th free trade agreement. Now, the 1,500-page deal is expected to bring trade between the two countries to over $1 billion within 5 years.
Amazing. All right, so what are some of the outcomes that we can expect to see in the deal?
Well, the agreement will reduce the price of Ukrainian food in Israel and, of course, Israeli goods in Ukraine. This is a big deal for a lot of people in Israel as well, because there's actually a huge Ukrainian population in Israel. Just last July, 300 new immigrants arrived at Ben Gurion Airport from Ukraine. And Ukraine and Russia actually provided Israel with the majority of immigrants in 2017.
All right, well, I know that this is the third time that Ukrainian President Poroshenko is in Israel since taking office in 2014. And the Israeli Prime Minister seems to be very excited about this as well. Take a look.
Today we're going to do something that will make it grow even bigger. We're about to sign a free trade agreement. We've worked on this for many years. The bureaucracies have had all the opportunities to prevent this from happening. We overcame it.
Yeah, and Netanyahu says the two leaders are going to discuss other ways to cooperate in fields from tech to health to aerospace and science as well.
All right, well, the Ukrainian president has certainly kept busy during his time here as well. He went to Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial. He went with the met with the Ukrainian-born Knesset Speaker Yuli Edelstein, and of course, he sat down with Israeli President Reuven Rivlin. So very full itinerary. But now, Natasha, I understand that tourism has also been increasing greatly in the Ukraine as well, especially from Israel.
You're right. Tourism in Ukraine is actually one of the country's fastest growing industries. The number of international tourists visiting Kyiv, the country's capital, has almost doubled since 2014. And what's interesting is that we're seeing a lot more Israelis that are looking to invest in Ukrainian property because the fact is real estate prices are significantly lower than in other parts of Europe and, of course, here in Israel.
Yeah, and I hear Odessa is a beautiful city that's attracting a lot of visitors right now.
It really is. I mean, Odessa is on the Black Sea. It's become somewhat of a summer beach destination for tourists from across Eastern Europe and Israel. And it's actually a city that some say is experiencing a Jewish renaissance of sorts.
All right, so it sounds like that sounds like a really good sign of resuming relations. And it really makes me happy because I think it's more than fair to mention that the Jewish people didn't always have such positive ties in Ukraine. Today's people aren't responsible for the crimes of the past, but there were tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Jewish people who were killed in pogroms during the years of early Ukraine, and that was long before World War II.
Right, that's true, but as you said, today is completely different, and a lot of the history between Ukraine, Israel, and the Jewish people is up on display. You may not know it, but on the eve of World War II, a third of the population of Odessa was Jewish, and you can see signs around the city that actually say the state of Israel was born here.
Please explain, why would they say that?
Well, okay, so this is interesting. The Jewish community in Odessa raised money for the land where Tel Aviv was established. And Odessa is the birthplace of the Zionist leader Zev Jabotinsky. If you haven't noticed, there's a street named after him in almost every Israeli city.
All the nice areas of town,
course.
Yeah.
And Tel Aviv's first mayor, Meir Dizengoff, actually spent his formative years in Odessa as well.
All right, so I'm assuming that there are a lot of Israelis who like visiting Odessa then.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The Israeli real estate company Green Park, knowing this, has actually just launched a major project on the Odessa coastline, a series of luxury buildings with apartments that are being sold for as low as $69,000. And that is quite the deal for your average Israeli who is looking to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, if they want an apartment that's nearly as nice here in Israel.
Well, it's clear that we're going to be hearing a lot more about this blossoming city down the line, especially given this major trade deal. I look forward to having you back in the studio to hear more. Thank you, Natasha.
Thanks, Aaron.
The Syrian ambassador to the United Nations has just threatened on Tuesday to attack Ben Gurion International Airport near Tel Aviv in response to Israel's aerial strikes earlier this week in Damascus. Speaking at a UN Security Council meeting on the Middle East in New York, the Syrian envoy Bashar Jafari called on the UN to prevent any further Israeli airstrikes on Syria. He asked, quote, "Isn't it high time for this council to take the necessary measures to stop the repeated Israeli aggression against the territories of my country? Or should we attract the attention of the war makers in this council by exercising our legitimate right to self-defense and respond to the Israeli aggression against the Damascus International Civil Airport by launching an aggression of our own against the Tel Aviv Airport?" End quote. He also then criticized permanent UN Security Council members, the United States, the UK, and France, who he said are partners and supporters of Israel in its aggressions. He added that the UN Security Council would end up being irrelevant, like the League of Nations before it, should it not act against Israel. Now, while Israel has hit thousands of targets in Syria in recent years in an attempt to curb Iranian and Hezbollah activities in the country, Syria has almost never responded. But the Syrian envoy's remarks at the UN coincide with another unusual event, the launching of an Iranian surface-to-surface missile into the Golan Heights on Sunday, which was intercepted by the Iron Dome missile defense system over a Mount Hermon ski resort. This is what prompted Israel to launch strikes on Iranian targets near Damascus, including at the Damascus International Airport. This unusual activity from Iran and Syria, however, has led some experts in the defense establishment to believe that Iran is stepping up its response to Israeli attacks in light of the end of the Syrian civil war and the United States troop withdrawal from the country. Yet, thankfully, experts also say that the possibility that this will escalate into a full-out war is still quite low. Syrian and Russian officials are accusing Israel today of launching a missile attack towards Damascus in broad daylight. Further, according to the Russian military, the barrage was blocked by Syrian air defense systems, and Israel, on the other hand, has not yet commented on the incident, but has stated that the Iron Dome has since intercepted a Syrian missile over Mount Hermon in the northern Golan Heights. Syrian news agencies reported that the alleged initial Israeli airstrike was against Hezbollah positions, though that hasn't been confirmed. And as for the Syrian strike, the IDF spokesperson's unit has yet to confirm whether the attack was retaliatory or offensive. Neither was the projectile's target revealed. Though regardless, security officials instructed citizens of the north to go about their daily lives, including upon the ski slopes of Mount Hermon, where thousands continued to enjoy the day. Israeli Air Force fighters reportedly struck multiple Iranian Hezbollah and Syrian targets near Damascus Monday morning, killing 11 pro-regime and Iranian fighters.
אמש עלה חיל האוויר בעוצמה במטרות איראניות בסוריה, לאחר שאיראן שיגרה משם טיל לעבר שטחנו. איננו עוברים לסדר היום מול מעשי תוקפנות אלה, מול ניסיונות איראן להתבסס צבאית בסוריה, ומול ההצהרות המפורשות של איראן, שבכוונתה להשמיד את ישראל, כפי שאמר רק עכשיו מפקד חיל האוויר של איראן. אנו פועלים גם נגד איראן וגם נגד הכוחות הסוריים שמסייעים לתוקפנות האיראנית. מי שמנסה לפגוע בנו, אנו פוגעים בו. מי שמאיים להשמיד אותנו, יישא במלוא האחריות.
Targets included weapons storage sites, an area at the Damascus International Airport, an Iranian intelligence site, an Iranian military training camp, and multiple Syrian surface-to-air missile defense launchers. This in response to a missile being fired from Syria into the Israeli Golan Heights Sunday afternoon, though Syrian reports claim that their initial and rare daytime attack on Sunday was itself a retaliation for alleged Israeli airstrikes over the weekend. Regardless, the Iron Dome intercepted the Syrian projectile, and the IDF claimed that no one in the area was in immediate danger. Yet the IDF added that, quote, by firing towards Israeli civilians, Iran once again proved that it is attempting to entrench itself in Syria, endangering the state of Israel and regional stability. We will continue operating determinedly to thwart these attempts, end quote. Prime Minister Netanyahu then reiterated these comments on his way back from his landmark visit to the African nation of Chad.
יש לנו מדיניות קבועה לפגוע בהתבססות האיראנית בסוריה ולפגוע בכל מי שמנסה לפגוע בנו. המדיניות הזאת לא משתנה כשאני בארץ וגם לא כשאני בביקור היסטורי בצ'אד. היא קבועה.
Army officials are clearly expecting additional return fire or some other such escalation in the region, however, as Operation Northern Shield comes to completion and Syrian state media reports against Israel's aggression. Further, following the latest pre-dawn assaults, the IDF has closed the Mount Hermon skiing area for at least a day and until further notice. The IDF demolished the West Bank family home of the terrorist Khalil Jabarin on Friday, just over 4 months since he stabbed to death Israel advocate and father of 4, Ari Fold. Demolition forces were met with stone throwers in Jabarin's hometown of Yatta near Hebron on the day of the demolition, but crowd dispersal methods were employed and there were no reported casualties. Now, the third-story apartment was mapped for demolition the day after the attack took place, but the Jabarin's family appealed twice, and the second appeal was rejected Thursday, however, and Supreme Court President Esther Hayut ordered an end to the delay in action. The IDF has already released video of the demolition that was carried out first thing Friday morning. Fold was stabbed to death while speaking on his cell phone outside a supermarket in the Gush Etzion block on September 16, 2018. Even after being stabbed multiple times in the back and neck, however, Fold managed to chase the terrorist and shoot him, potentially saving the life of a nearby shop worker who Jabarin had started to run towards. Fold was an Israeli activist and an advocate who regularly contributed to many organizations as well as to ILTV, and he was posthumously awarded the Israel Police's Medal of Distinction. Meanwhile, the IDF has also now notified the family of Assem and Salih Barghouti that their home is slated for demolition on Sunday. The brothers are charged with carrying out 2 shooting attacks in Ofra and Givat Asaf and planning a third. Salih was shot dead by Israeli security forces during attempts to capture him in December, though, and Assem was finally arrested earlier in January. But their attacks left an emergency-born infant and 2 soldiers, Sergeant Yosef Cohen and Staff Sergeant Yovel Mor-Yosef, dead, and at least 9 others were wounded. Amidst ongoing rioting along the Gaza border overnight on Tuesday, a company commander with the Israeli paratroopers unit was lightly wounded by Hamas sniper fire. Thankfully, however, the bullet only grazed the soldier's helmet, and he was released from the hospital hours later. Meanwhile, during those same riots, 5 Palestinian suspects attempted to breach the security fence with Israel, 2 of whom were successful, though the group turned around as fast as they entered. Still, the IDF responded immediately to the above incidents with tank shellings of a Hamas post in the Strip, injuring at least 2 Hamas members and killing a third. Then the Air Force launched a series of strikes against various Hamas targets in Gaza as well. Then finally, as a final punitive measure against violence in the Strip, Prime Minister and Defense Minister Netanyahu ordered that the third Qatari installment of $15 million to Hamas in Gaza be halted en route. The payment was already approved, however, and Hamas officials speaking to the Times of Israel said that, quote, Netanyahu's decision to prevent their entry is a crime that will push Gaza towards an explosion, end quote. Further, speaking to Army Radio on Wednesday morning, former Shin Bet head Yaakov Peri says Israel should allow the Qatari funding as well because, quote, Hamas will not become a lover of Israel because of this money or the lack thereof. So Israel needs to act according to its own interest, which is to avoid confrontation. If the same Qatari funds cause a confrontation not to occur, the broader consideration must prevail, end quote. Still, allowing millions of dollars to enter untraceably into Gaza for use by the Hamas terror group is not a popular decision, especially as Hamas has never relinquished its vow to destroy the Jewish state and rarely desists from violent acts anyway. Back in the West Bank, 2 IDF soldiers were lightly injured Monday morning while escorting Jewish worshippers to the area of Joseph's tomb in Nablus. They were evacuated to a hospital nearby and are recovering well. The incident occurred while en route to the tomb with a group of nearly 1,500 Jewish worshippers. Clashes broke out between Israeli soldiers and Palestinians who threw stones. Despite this, prayer services at the tomb continued as scheduled without disruption. Elsewhere, however, Palestinians threw Molotov cocktails and stones at Israeli soldiers during an operation in the Ephraim area of the West Bank. The IDF responded with crowd dispersal methods, and additionally, as the evening progressed, Israeli army and Shin Bet officials reportedly arrested around 30 Palestinians across the West Bank for questioning, and security forces also found and seized a Carl Gustav automatic weapon, the same kind often used by Palestinian shooting terrorists, as they're typically made in small independent shops and are sold on black markets. A Jewish miner has just been indicted for the killing of a Palestinian woman in the West Bank last October. Aisha Rabi was murdered after rocks were thrown at the car she and her family were traveling in. And for the first time on Wednesday, it was revealed that the rock that killed her contained the suspected miner's DNA. Rabi, a mother of 8, was driving in a car with her husband near the Tapuach barrier when they came under attack by stone throwers. And from the very beginning, Palestinian officials claimed that Jewish rock throwers had been involved. While the miner in question and some of his friends from the nearby Pri Haaretz Yeshiva had allegedly walked to the top of a hill just meters away from the highway before they began pelting cars with heavy rocks. And the suspect, who has been indicted, is believed to have thrown a rock weighing 2 kilograms at the Rabi's car, hitting Aisha directly in the head. Rabi's husband thankfully managed to maintain control of the car, however, while swerving out of danger's way and before he or his daughter could be hit as well. Rabi's killing has set off several retaliatory attacks by Palestinians, though, who have been angered by how much time has passed without her murder being solved. And although the identity of the suspect remains under gag order, it has been revealed that his DNA was on the rock that killed Rabi. The manslaughter charge and delay in filing his indictment indicate that his conviction may not be that simple, however. According to his lawyer, Adi Kedar, the miner had provided an alibi that he wasn't on the site of the attack, and he's refused to speak to the Israeli Shin Bet for the past 3 weeks. 4 other miners were then previously arrested by the Israeli security agency as well, but were released weeks ago. Speaking from the capital of N'Djamena on Sunday, Chad President Idris Deby and Prime Minister Netanyahu officially announced the resumption of diplomatic ties between their 2 nations. This during Netanyahu's brief but historic visit to Chad as the first sitting Israeli Prime Minister ever to do so. It also follows Deby's surprise visit to Israel in November last year. But this means that Israel now has formal diplomatic relations with a record 161 world nations, and according to the 2 leaders, this newest partnership will be greatly beneficial for both. At their joint conference, Netanyahu spoke of all the important trade that is now to come.
There is a lot that we can do together.
Il y a beaucoup de choses qu'on pourrait faire ensemble.
And we discussed how to deepen our cooperation in every field, beginning with security.
Donc nous avons discuté comment élargir et approfondir notre coopération, surtout dans le domaine de sécurité,
But also agriculture,
mais aussi l'agriculture,
food, water,
l'eau,
energy, health,
l'énergie, la médecine
and many more.
et d'autres, nombreux autres domaines.
And I believe that this cooperation will build a better, safer, and more prosperous future for both our peoples.
But in addition to such surface benefits, the Israeli premier again reiterated how important it is for Israel to expand relations both within Africa and within the Arab and Muslim world.
אנחנו מתקבלים כאן בכבוד, כפי שקיבלנו את הנשיא דבי בארץ בכבוד רב. ישראל פורצת לעולם המוסלמי. זו תוצאה של עבודה מאומצת בשנים האחרונות. אנחנו עושים היסטוריה, ואנחנו הופכים את ישראל לכוח עולמי עולה.
And perhaps as evidence of Israel's growing inroads in Africa, at least, the Prime Minister's flight was allowed to return home over South Sudanese airspace, which is controlled by Northern Sudan, a nation that has no diplomatic ties to Israel. And finally, Netanyahu promised towards the end of his speech that just a month ahead of the upcoming April elections in Israel, an Israeli delegation of various economic leaders will arrive in Chad to explore the many possibilities that President Deby and the Chad government are open to offer.
So I believe in your future, I believe in our future, I believe in the future of our friendship.
The Ramat Gan Safari announced on Monday the birth of a brand new female baby rhinoceros. The young rhino, who has yet to be named, was born on December 30th, and both the rhino's mother, Keren Peles, and the calf are doing well. Keren Peles gave birth in the park before zookeepers had the chance to lure her into a fenced area where she could have delivered the baby safely. As such, the zookeepers had to amend their plan and direct Keren and her young calf after the birth to a safe and fenced-off section where they remained for a few weeks separated from the rhino crash or herd. Soon, however, the young and adventurous baby rhino decided to explore her surroundings and managed to escape the enclosed safe area. So zookeepers immediately released Keren so she could continue to offer the baby her motherly protection.
She was born to her mother here in the African area. Usually we try to encourage mom to go inside a fenced area where she can deliver quietly and with no disturbance. It didn't happen, but we managed to lure her and the baby in. Unfortunately, the little baby was a bit bored in the fenced area, wanted maybe to explore the African park and the rest of the animals here, and she went out.
And now we are also happy to report that the new baby is finally adapting alongside her mother to being a part of the safari's larger rhino crash. The baby rhino is the 31st to be born in the safari, and the white rhino is in danger of extinction. So the Ramat Gan Safari takes great pride in its breeding of these endangered animals. All right, that's it for this week's Roundup. Tune in next week for the next episode of ILTV's Weekly Review. I'm Aaron Porras, and thank you for joining us.